Good afternoon. I'm Karen Holmes Ward. As the cannabis industry in Massachusetts grows, it continues to struggle with diversity and inclusion. When Massachusetts voters legalized recreational marijuana in 2016, part of the pitch was correcting some of the wrongs from the war on drugs. But as Matt Reed explains, despite that mandate, the cannabis industry remains overwhelmingly white.
Just making sure that there's dedicated space where people can touch and feel things.
Nikki John opened the Heritage Club in Charlestown back in September, becoming the first black woman-owned dispensary in all of Boston. And since opening day, equity, from the products they carry to the staff Nikki hires, has been a pillar of the business.
For me, I was like, how can I make a difference for people and educate and do that in the city where I'm from?
This isn't just about representation, it's about making sure there is a seat at the table as Massachusetts rakes in record profits from this budding industry.
I've had some people come in there in tears and they're like, you changed my life, you inspired me. Sorry, I get choked up talking about it because it's so exciting.
Statewide recreational marijuana sales have now surpassed the $4 billion mark since the first dispensaries opened in 2018. But a closer look at the data shows the industry remains overwhelmingly white and male-run. Of the state's active marijuana establishment agents, 62% are men compared to 37% women. And when it comes to race, nearly 68% are white compared to just 10% Hispanic and 8% black.
We know very well that those communities and the people who've been most harmed are largely black and brown people.
Ava Callender Concepcion is one of the 5 commissioners on the Cannabis Control Commission. She points to Massachusetts' Social Equity Program, which gives applicants access to technical assistance and expedited licensing review, as one way equity is being successfully promoted in the state, but says 2 major barriers remain: access to capital and community host agreements.
We have this new law that has been enacted, Chapter 180, and within that law is increased oversight. So now the commission has oversight over those municipalities to make sure that equity is being combed in to the process.
Also part of the new law signed by then Governor Baker in August creates the Cannabis Social Equity Advisory Board that will oversee how money from a newly created fund is handed out to equity applicants to remove some of the restrictions from entering the marijuana industry that continues to remain out of reach for many of the communities hardest hit by the war on drugs.
We do have work to do. I think there will be years of work to continue to do, but the work is happening.
In Charlestown, Matt Reed, WCVB News Center 5.
Thanks, Matt, for that story. And joining me now is Ava Callender Concepcion. She's one of the state's cannabis control commissioners. Last weekend, the New England Cannabis Convention wrapped up its 3-day event. 10,000 people attended. Clearly, there is widespread interest in cannabis. So how is the commission ensuring equitable distribution of cannabis licenses and addressing the historical and systemic barriers that exist in this industry?
So there are a few ways that the Cannabis Control Commission at the state level has been prioritizing equity. I think first, we've gotten a lot of attention because Massachusetts was the first state in the entire country to have equity baked into our mandate. So by law, we're required to create an industry that is all-inclusive and specifically includes involvement from communities and people from communities that have been disproportionately harmed by cannabis prohibition and enforcement. And that's just another way of saying by the war on drugs. So we're mandated across the board to make sure that we have a reflective and inclusive industry. And some of the ways that you might see that in the Cannabis Control Commission are through our social equity program, which gives a lot of licensing opportunities and economic empowerment.
Is the social equity program achieving the goal? Are enough people making their way through the program?
So the short answer is no. We're aware of that. There have been about 800 people who have gone through this program, but unfortunately, they're only in the double digits of those participants who've commenced operations. And we have really tried to hone in on what those problems are and why those numbers are not reflective when we look at who's commenced operations. And 2 of the things that I've mentioned were lack of access to capital and also getting through the local barriers through municipalities and getting those host community agreements that are so so sought after, because although we had equity already baked in at the state level, local, towns and municipalities were not required to have those same things embedded in their processes.
And so you're trying to address the barrier to capital by starting the Social Equity Trust Fund. How much money has been collected? How much has been distributed?
So it's still really early. I think one thing to really clarify is that the Cannabis Control Commission does not have control or authority over the fund. We did advocate, and I'll speak for myself in particular, I advocated for the creation of that social equity fund, but it lives underneath the executive branch, under the governor and the governor's administration. So there's a citizens board that's been appointed that is overseeing this, but I can't speak to some of the specifics only because it's not within our umbrella.
I understand. So let's talk more about some of the collaborations with community leaders and organizations to ensure that the interests and concerns of communities of color are being heard and addressed in the regulatory process. How do you take politics out of the process? You talked about some of the other communities that are not allowing some of these businesses in their area. How do you manage the political aspects of this?
I don't think that it's realistic to completely separate politics from the process and from the industry, because a lot of the things that we've seen and a lot of the changes that we've been able to implement is through some legislative change and advocacy and working with a lot of elected officials. Before I became a commissioner, I was an attorney in the Senate. So I worked there and I developed our criminal justice reform laws, largely around sealing and expungement, shortening the sealing window, creating the first statutory expungement process. And that experience brought me into this space where now I'm identifying what the collateral consequences are within the CCC, what we might be perpetuating within our regulations. But I've also been able to use that experience and those connections that I've developed and built, those political connections, to advocate and sort of reframe the way that we advocate as an entire agency to change law. And I think that that's necessary.
So the politics are good and the politics can be bad?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that is a very good, concise way of putting it. Yes, that is accurate.
We saw the data, 62% of the active establishments that we see across Massachusetts are run by men, 37% by women. Matt Reed just referenced the breakdown on race. So what's being done to achieve more racial and gender parity?
Yes. So that I'll speak for myself, because when a commissioner is here, we can only speak in our own individual capacity. But there's a lot that is happening now because of the change that is included in Chapter 180, that new law that's passed that requires equity to be baked in at the municipal level, that requires a lot of our own changes. So now we have oversight and authority over HCAs. I am personally over the Host Community Agreement Working Group and the Municipal Equity Working Group. So we're developing those regulations now, but I will say that I've sort of honed in on the correlation between criminal records and those who have operated in the legacy market having a window and opportunity here in the regulated industry, because there have been barriers, there have been regs, there have been laws that sort of continue those barriers here in cannabis, which is sort of a oxymoron when you think about this.
And you have given us the tease to our next segment.
Okay.
All right, when we come back, we're going to talk more about how the Commission is working to include those who've been impacted by the criminalization of marijuana in the industry. Stay with us.